So kind of look at that description real quick. The thing I want to point out in the description of this is that the goal of this paper is for you to apply what you have learned about Israel's history and theology along with your knowledge of interpretation, right? It's an opportunity to see how the material presented within this course helps us to better understand and critically engage the text. And a paper will reflect this, right? You all have learned a lot this whole semester about how Israel's theology has changed and shifted and adapted, right? How we have the perspective of the Deuteronomist, right? How we have the perspective of the prophets, right? Your paper, one of the steps you're going to do is try to place that psalm in a time period, right? And you can say, oh, I think it's in this time period because it really reflects this crisis, or it really reflects this perspective, right? So how you engage in this is going to demonstrate to me that you are not only familiar with the biblical interpretation tools that we've been practicing, but also that you've been in this class, right? That you kind of know this history, know this theology. There are 9 Psalms to choose from. All right, so you don't have to go scouring the entire book of Psalms for one. There are 9 there to choose from. I have chosen ones that I think there is plenty of resources for, right? There are online journals.
These are the chapters.
That's a journal and an article combined. It's a journal.
These are the chapters in Psalms, right?
Yes. So Psalm 24 is chapter Psalm. Yeah. Let me see here. So there's 9 there to choose from. I think there are plenty of resources there for you in those. They are Psalms that I think we can kind of fairly get a good handle of when they were written. So you have until the day after the test to choose one, right? Which should give you plenty of time to kind of just glance through those and say, oh, I think this one's the most interesting, or I don't think this one's the most interesting, but I think I can write the most and the best about it, right? So kind of make sure that you're kind of looking at these through this lens, right? Not like, oh, I think this is the prettiest one and it speaks to my heart, but I think I can write a 6-page paper about this. Yeah, Joan. Yeah, you're going to be taking the knowledge of this class and pouring it into this paper, right? As you do your exegesis about the psalm. So kind of look at this format down here. And if you haven't noticed, the page is double-sided here. I have a kind of really easy format for you to use. And at the top of this, it says, your sections may run longer than this, but they should not be any shorter. Okay? So your heading and cover page will just have your name and all the class stuff, but it'll also have your passage in full. All right? It's right up there. Okay? So you've got all that on your heading and cover page. Your first page is historical criticism, right? We've done this, right? When was it written, right? How can you tell? There's all these kind of questions for you to look at. You can go back on Moodle, look at the questions of historical criticism, and try to answer those questions in your paper. Right? Remember when we were doing exegesis, we had that PDF that said all those questions. So that first page is historical criticism. The second page is form criticism. Right? What type of psalm it is. We'll go through that in this class on, I think, Wednesday or Friday. Different forms. Consider the religious, or whoops, it shouldn't say cultivate. It should say cultic. Yay for, you can change that. Religious or cultic situation. Yay for auto check there. Poetic structure, right? You'll see this when you're doing your research. If you flip over, page 3 is grammatical criticism.
So this is a research paper.
Mm-hmm. Page 3 is the grammatical criticism, right? Remember that when you're doing grammatical criticism, it's not, oh, this English word is interesting, or I don't know what this English word means. You're looking at the Hebrew, right? So you're going to be using that resource that you used before, Blue Letter Bible, to kind of dig into those Hebrew words. And finally, the last bit of your paper, last 3 pages, or however long you want to write it, is trying to take all that data that you found, right, given the historical, the form, and the grammatical criticism, and bring that information together and help us see what this psalm would have originally meant, right, to its original audience.
Wow.
Right? So taking that information, be like, oh, okay, well, if it's written during this time period, I mean, you can see here's an example that sounds really wordy and is totally made up. But I said, by understanding that Psalm 5:16 is written late into the post-exilic period, right, which we're not really familiar with, it becomes clear that the king being rejected by God is none other than Zerubbabel, right? I'm just kind of making this up, but I'm saying, like, you know, if we had a song here that was saying, you know, the king is scorned and his blood is scattered among the nations, right? If I'm like, oh, well, if this is in the post-exilic period, we can see how this is talking about Zerubbabel. And then I go into that next little thing where it says, this therefore reveals that some Israelites rejected the idea of a Davidic covenant.
Are we retelling the story, sort of?
No, you don't have to completely retell the story. What you're doing is taking these evidence, and you say, okay, I know it's written in this time period. These words seem to be really important. It has this kind of form, which is only used when we're like praising a king, right? So you're using all that information and you're kind of bringing it together. It's, I mean, think about it like a crime scene.
Your most important thing is identifying your era. That, I mean, within the time that you think it was.
Well, that's going to be a huge help to
Okay.
do that for sure. Knowing when this thing was written, right? And then kind of going into each of those other criticisms. Yeah, so this is a crime scene. You're trying to say, like, okay, I've taken all this data together now, and now I can create a picture of what happened. It was, you know, Miss Bluth in the bathroom with the handlebars.
So there's no right or wrong. It's pretty much what we gain.
As much as you can. Now remember, what I'm asking for here is the original meaning. I'm not asking for, you know, I think this psalm is telling us to trust God more, right? I'm asking what the psalm would have meant for the people who heard it,
Okay.
or for whom it was written, right? Another little note down there, it says, just make sure to keep the psalm as your focus, rather than like making some kind of theological comments about God, right? So if you do bring up God, make sure you say things like, from the perspective of the psalm, God is an angry God, or according to the psalmist, God is rejecting Israel, right? Or in the psalm, God is depicted as, right? And that way you're keeping your focus on the psalm rather than on God or religion or anything like that, right? Because we're focusing on the text here. There's some other little notes down here. 6 is the minimum, right? But don't go over 10. You overachievers. Plagiarism. If you plagiarize on this paper, you will fail the course. If you are unsure that you are plagiarizing, you're like, Mr. Leeds, I don't know if this is plagiarism or not, email me, ask me. You're going to be turning these in through Turnitin, if any of you have used it before, and it checks it for me. Right? Yeah.
Why don't we have access to that? I don't think that that's okay.
What? did it check me? Did it find it? Let me think. Yeah. That's a great question. I would say a really, and I've talked with other teachers about this, a really good kind of way of avoiding this is read something, take a step back, think about it for a couple minutes, and then write it. Right? That's a good way to, if you can just take a step back, turn around, write it out, chances are you're not going to be plagiarizing because you've thought about it, you know, processed it and put it down, rather than like, you know, if you don't hit copy and paste, that doesn't mean it's not plagiarism. I can sit there and like copy something word for word, and that's still plagiarism. Okay? Copy and paste is just a nice shortcut for that. So don't do that. At the end of your paper, right? You have, the beginning bits are all, you know, I'm going to use this form of exegesis, you use grammatical, you use formal, you know, I have historical, so you're going to do those. And the end of your paper is kind of proposing a certain way of reading your psalm, right? Trying to get to that original meaning, right? Based on all the exegesis you've done, right? I know, unfortunately, English 112 is not required for this class. And English 112 is where you learn how to write an argument paper. So I'm going to give you a nice little summary of how to write an argument paper, right? My argument, right?
This is the argument paper?
This, huh? In a sentence. I mean, like your last little bit, your last few pages. You're kind of, yeah, it's a synthesis. You're synthesizing all the information you have to say, based on this, based on all these, here's my, you know, proposition. And your proposition or your, you know, what you're going to claim is called your thesis. Right? This is like your thesis statement.
So you reiterating your thesis statement?
Well, you won't have one for the whole first half because you'll just say, here's what I found in grammatical criticism, here's what I found in form criticism, right? And then you're going to say, based on all this research, my thesis is blah, blah, blah. So for example, after all my research that I did, I have concluded that the Smurfs are communist. This is my thesis. Smurfs are commies. Smurfs are commies. Right? That's my thesis statement. Now what I have to do for a thesis statement is I have to back it up with supporting evidence. Right? Your whole first half of your paper is your evidence. You're just going to put it together in ways that make sense for me. Right? So for example, I could say, here's my thesis statement, Smurfs are commies. Piece of evidence number 1. Voila. Papa Smurf looks like Karl Marx. Right? Point number 1. Right? I would say, oh, look at the beards. They are so similar. The white hair. Karl Marx had white hair. Right? That's my supporting evidence number 1.
So does Santa
Right?
Claus.
So when you write your paper, you'll say, well, Psalm 44, when read in like the right context or whatever, right, in the historical setting that it would have been read in, is really about David being visited by aliens. Right? Point number 1, such and such. And then you back that up with either form or grammatical or whatever pieces of evidence you have that really support that point. Right? So you're not just kind of going through, this is kind of a really important thing to say because I think a lot of papers that I've gotten in the past are summaries. They just say, verse 1, here's what it's about. Verse 2, here's what it's about. Verse 3, here's what it's about. It's not what you need to do. Right? You go through those criticisms, do the criticisms that you've practiced, and then you're kind of synthesizing all that, right, to make points. And if you need to bring something over from form criticism and grammatical criticism to support one point, do that, right? So that's my first point. My second point is that Gargamel is a dirty capitalist, right? He wants to turn the Smurfs into gold. This is his whole task in life. Therefore, Gargamel is a dirty capitalist. Therefore, the Smurfs are commies, right? Your main evil character is all about money, right? And point number 3 is that the Smurfs all have jobs and all have tasks, and their task is their identity, right? They had an episode in the Smurfs where the Smurfs tried to do each other's jobs, right? And everything went haywire, right? This represents communism because in communism everybody has their assigned task and you're supposed to do that assigned task, and if you don't do that assigned task then you're going to mess up all of society. Therefore, the Smurfs are commies.
I agree.
Right? You see how I bring every little point back to support my thesis?
No, when I do my thesis, I'm thinking about the Smurfs.
You really on Smurfs?
Trying something from
So, this is kind of like that last little bit of your paper is just, taking those observations that you've made and applying them to like one kind of idea.